All right, welcome to another episode of Expats and Entrepreneurs. Today we are joined by the world traveler, the expat, the entrepreneur, Miss Kamri Haynes. Kamri, the world traveler, is also a business owner here in Panama. Kamri, thank you for joining the show today as my first guest.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
But do you know why you're my first guest?
I know. I want to know. I'm nosy.
All right. Well, it does. We're both nosy. Uh, The one thing I've noticed about being out here is the amount of women who are choosing to make Panama their home. So the people who are asking the question most of all that I see about um, what's it like to own a business or how do you make money in Panama are trending to be women and more specifically Black women. So what better choice to have as our first opening guest than you?
I appreciate that. I'm happy to help answer any questions you have. So,
Awesome, awesome. Well, before we dive into your business, because you know how I feel about your cookies. You know how I feel about them. I'm a repeat customer of those. Uh,
absolutely.
what I want to do is kind of go back a little bit about like how you even made the decision to move to Panama, and if you always knew that you were going to be an entrepreneur. So, if you don't mind, could you tell our guests, tell me a little bit about your background? Like, where'd you grow up that made you such a world traveler?
Yeah, actually, sure. And pardon the noise. Of course, I live on Avenida Balboa, so there's always something fun going on. So, if
Always.
you hear any sirens, I promise nothing crazy is happening. It's probably just traffic. So I actually am from upstate New York. I grew up in a capital in Albany. And honestly, no, I did not know I was going to be a world traveler. Oddly enough, I did not get my passport until I was an adult. I did not have one before I turned 18. So,
All right. But you got it,
it,
and that's the important part.
yep, yep. And for my 18th birthday, my mom took me on a cruise. So, of course, we both had to get our passports. That was my first time. My mom had hers as well, which was kind of cool. And so we went on a cruise in Europe, and then after that, it was just the world. So 77 countries later, here I am.
77. 77.
77.
Okay. So I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you must have visited Panama like 3 or 4 times before deciding to move here.
Funny thing is, no, I did not. Actually, I did not visit Panama for the first time until last year. Or no, I'm sorry, 20. So this is 2024. So until last year, until 2022. It's the first time I visited Panama. Oddly enough, I know.
Huh.
Everyone kind of makes that face and says, "Why? It's so quiet." It's just
Hey, listen, I'm with you. I'm here in Panama, and everyone looked at me like, "So why Panama? Why not Costa Rica?"
yeah,
And I'm like, I make
yeah,
an excuse like I grew up here, but that was only 3 or 4 years, so that doesn't really
right,
answer it.
right. So no, I actually so interesting story. I worked in IT for a long time and then kind of left that and wanted to travel more, and it wasn't before COVID wasn't really a viable business. I was traveling a lot for work and I just was not a fan of that. So I actually went into the bartending business after that, simply because I wanted more flexibility and the money was nice and I could come and go as I kind of pleased. And it gave me a lot of flexibility during the winter since I lived in South Carolina. And so summertime was really our busy season. So wintertime, I was able to kind of take off and travel if I wanted to. And so I happened to travel summer of 2022. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yes. So June 2022, traveled to Thailand for the third time with my mom. So my mom and I went to Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia, and Bali. So I was gone for about 3.5 weeks. So I think 24 days. I think we were traveling. Came back from my trip, went back to my job 2 days later, and unfortunately caught COVID.
Oh,
So
that was
I
back when COVID was a big deal, though.
yes, yeah. So COVID was still. I mean, we the first time I actually had visited Thailand was in December of 2019, literally right before COVID actually happened.
Okay.
We came back January, and then basically we were inundated with COVID in February. So we were kind of out of COVID by the 2022 by that moment, but it was more of a, I guess it was still happening in other places in the world, but we weren't as, things were not on lockdown. We were had gone back to kind of normal, and anybody who's from the South knows that the South kind of was always back to normal. I think.
We didn't care. I was in Texas.
Right, right. They were like, "That's not a thing. COVID's not real." So,
Right.
so when I returned back home and I got sick, of course I had to call out. I could not go to work with COVID, and my boss, and not my immediate boss, but the owner of the restaurant I worked at, suspended me for 3 weeks for coming back from a vacation and then calling out sick.
All right.
Right.
So all that culminated in you saying, you know what? I think I'm going to be an entrepreneur one day. I'm going to kick all this behind.
So, me and my mom had visited. I had gone to Costa Rica in May of that year,
Okay.
beginning of May. So I had gone to Costa Rica in April with a few of my friends, and wanted kind of a little bit of an additional few days somewhere. I called my mom, who was still in South Carolina at home, and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to extend my trip a few days. Would you like to meet me somewhere?" And so she said, "I've never been to Panama. We should go there." So that was in May of 2022. And so I left Costa Rica and flew to Panama. My mom met me here. We were here 5 days and it poured the entire time. So we didn't really see much of Panama. We were literally here for 5 days. We stayed in the city. When I came back from my trip a couple of months later, in July, had gotten suspended. I, went into me and my mom had shared a house. We built a house in Myrtle Beach, about 4,000 square feet. So two sides to
Wow.
it.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a place to leave. Everybody wants to be at
Yeah.
the beach. Okay.
I know. So my mom hated it. She hated every bit of it. And she had retired at this point, and she basically had become just housebound. She didn't want to go outside. It was pretty heavy Trump time during that era. So for her, it was just not somewhere she wanted to be. And being from
Hmm.
New York, it was a bit of a interesting time for us. So I kind of went into the living room and told her, "Hey, I got suspended for 3 weeks for calling out for obviously having COVID. Wasn't intentional, but." And she said, "Great, I want to move." Okay. So I said, "Well, where?" "Actually, I think I'd like to move to Panama." That was in July of 2022. We moved to Panama October 1st of 2022.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So here's some of the themes that I've experienced myself. As you know, my mother also lives in Panama.
Yep.
Um, People who come like make the decision really quick, whether they're going to stay or whether they're not. But more times than not, they're making the decision to stay.
Yes.
Is that what you're seeing too?
I do see that a lot. I think it also depends on to where in Panama you visit. See, I had not visited any other part of Panama other than Panama City.
Okay.
Um, and I had lived abroad before this. I had lived in Mexico, in Playa del Carmen and in Mexico City beforehand, for short periods of time. And so I had already been subjected or accustomed to living abroad for a bit. And Panama City for me, I knew I needed to be in a city. I mean, I liked Costa Rica when I visited, but it wasn't somewhere that I think I would want to stay long term. I'm not a huge, beach person, and so after a couple of days, I'm a little bored.
Okay, okay, I got to touch on that one. So when I told people that we were moving to Panama, I had people respond and say, "Well, have you tried Costa Rica?" And the first thing I would ask them, having never been to Costa Rica, is why? What am I missing? And 4 out of 5 times, they had never been themselves. So they have
Right.
this wonderful marketing engine where everyone is saying you should go to Costa Rica who have never been themselves, but they will actively discourage you from coming to Panama, which is to me um, a very serious contender for being a destination for a lot of folks who especially are looking at building businesses or just getting out of the United States drama, whatever
In
the
general.
drama is you want
Right.
to call it. Yeah. So
Right.
so so continue. Okay. So wait a minute. I want to touch on one more thing. One more thing.
Yeah, sure.
You lived in Mexico. Is that where you became bilingual? Because I'm sure that our guests don't know that you also speak Spanish, which is a big deal when you live in Panama.
Yeah, so I had taken Spanish all throughout high school and 2 semesters in college. I really honestly took Spanish so that I could offset another, I wasn't an art person. I didn't want to take any of those kind of electives. So language seemed like a smart idea. And so living in Mexico, I did learn to speak Spanish fluently, or at least relatively fluently.
Conversation. We'll say that.
Yeah,
Much
right.
better than me.
And a reason being was I chose when I so like unlike most people who generally a lot of times I think that when people migrate to other countries, most people migrate towards touristy areas because that's what we know. And we're just kind of trying to find places around people that we can connect with, right? And so if you don't speak a language, you're generally gravitating towards expats. And that's kind of, I guess, um, how most people travel abroad. I will quickly touch on the fact that I'm not a massive fan of the word expat.
Oh, okay.
Um,
We can drop that.
I,
I like it because it makes a nice da 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 on the title, but I can understand not really being a fan of it.
yeah, I just feel like you know, we refer to expats as expatriates, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't ever admit or want to acknowledge that I'm from the United States. Of course, I am. That is who I am, right? But I do think that globally, we're everywhere, and so it's hard to kind of expat seems like a strange word. I feel more like I'm a visiting resident. I
Visiting
don't know.
permanent resident. I
Visiting permanent
understand
resident,
because
right?
there are people who are intent on returning their passport. There are people who are saying, "I'm going to leave and I'm never coming back," and
Right.
I'm not one of those people. Like I will return, and I
Right.
definitely do not intend on returning my passport.
Well, so in an interesting scenario, I don't have any plan on ever living in the United States again. That is not on my list of things to do. It would have to be something probably very drastic for me to do that. Honestly, I really don't have any intention of returning to the United States except for a handful of things that I just can't kind of get anywhere else.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, there are a few things that just kind of that happens, right? I don't care what you tell me, whatever the concept is. There is nowhere in the world like Las Vegas. You can't get that anywhere else. I've been to Macau. You can't even get it there. That's a different situation. So some things I will return for because of those things. I do still have family there, and so I do have family members who are not travelers, and so in order for me to see them, I would have to visit the United States. I try to limit that as much as possible. But so for instance, the first year I lived here, I did not go back to the United States at all. So
You know what? And I probably would not have myself, except I've got two sons, one in New York City and
mhm,
one in Colorado. And we had made a deal that until such time off in the future, my wife and I we would rotate. One of us would go visit one son and then kind of rotate. But as you know, New York City is really expensive. So it's actually
yes,
a better benefit for us to just fly everyone here and
very
out in
yeah,
Panama, and then you can go back home, and that's a vacation for
right,
them. So that's another way
right,
of looking at it. But I do agree, and it isn't there. You can get pretty much anything you want here that you can get in the states until you can't. There are some things that you just can't find here, or are priced at a point that it's like, you know what, I can just go get these somewhere else.
right. I will say the nice thing about having like the access, of course, to the internet. I can't imagine quite doing this in a different time frame.
Right.
It is nice that I can order things from Amazon and have them, at least get here in some form or
Mailboxes,
fashion.
etc., or
Mailboxes,
whatever
etc.
your
Right.
hot box is. It's all
Right. So things that I am missing, I'm fine to do that. I noticed that I do make adjustments though, and there are a lot of things that I honestly don't think I think about anymore that I kind of don't need. Um, and so you kind of find your little space as you're going along. And I think one thing though for me that's a little bit different than I think most people who are in the position to move to another country, come abroad. I'm quite young for what I did. And so at 37, I came here without any sort of space to be able to have a reason to do that. Right. My mom is of retirement age and she was able to acquire a retirement visa. And so for her, it was a easy decision it was not for me. And so I had to kind of make a process and say, well, what am I going to do? The longer now that COVID has gone on, and now that we're kind of getting back into the state, a lot of companies are now refusing to allow people to work remotely abroad because they know that a lot of people are doing that. And so now you've got companies who, initially were paying these people 150,000 dollars a year who are moving to Costa Rica and spending a quarter of that to live. I'm, being facetious
Hey,
on a quarter with Costa
don't hate
Rica.
the
It's a,
player, hate the game is all I got to
right.
say on that.
Um, but the job that I was on previously, the IT job, it required me to travel to different sites in the United States. And so what I didn't like about that was I could not live abroad because the cost of getting back and forth was expensive.
Yes.
So if I needed to go to a site to do any projects, I had to fly myself back to the US on my own and then continue to travel once I was there. And so that just really wasn't something I wanted to do. And so when we sold our house, I was grateful to have a good little amount of cash that I could kind of hold on to for a while, and kind of figure out what I wanted to do. So
All right. And I love that part because I think a lot of people coming here are they fit kind of in two camps. And there's one group that are pretty much just retirees, and they're getting a pension out of visa. They've got they've got proof that they have basically $1,000 or more a month coming in. And then there's this other group, which we have a difference in age, but we're kind of in the same boat. That I'm not a quote unquote retirement age, and I do still have a business that's based in the United States. But I made myself a fractional because I knew I did not want to travel throughout the states. I didn't want to have to come back for work. And a lot of people are wondering how do I save up the money so that I can live anywhere. Panama is the topic of our show, but it doesn't matter if it's Thailand or wherever. People are wondering, how do I save up that money? And a lot of it does come down to what's the equity in your house? Can you sell that
right,
and move with that and then figure things out when you get to where you're at? So
absolutely.
I want to talk about now. I want to talk about now. When did you learn that you could make phenomenal cookies?
So I've always been a baker. I grew up. My aunt was a baker. My grandmother was a baker. My grandmother owned a restaurant when I was a child. So I've always kind of been a baker. It was never an intent for me to. That was never an intent for me to have that as a business. I never really thought about that. It was just something I enjoyed doing. And A common friend of ours, Big Will. Shout out to Big Will TV. He I had a birthday party and I had made some cupcakes for and a cake for him and the people that we went to the party. And someone just commented and said, "Why don't you sell these?" And I had never thought about it before. It really wasn't anything that I contemplated doing. And I noticed that I had to start making some kind of adjustments at some point because my money, again, won't last forever. And aside from that, that was something I had to critically think about. If I am out of the business or out of the United States workforce, by the time I get to retirement age, I won't have Social Security because I would have been out of the workforce for so long, I wouldn't qualify for it. And so
Understood.
that's definitely something that I think that people who are in my age bracket have to consider. And you have to consider whether or not you're in a place that you're able to be able to sustain yourself for a long period of time because as you know, the salary range in Panama is extremely low for what we're accustomed to.
Well, not only
Now,
is it low, but there's certain jobs you just can't
certain
hold
jobs you just
because
can't do. Right.
exactly.
Right. So a lot of restricted jobs. But even those, I mean, the pay isn't something we're accustomed to. And so that's something that I had to kind of make an adjustment for and think about what can I do that will help me sustain myself in terms of not it plausibly not being able to collect Social Security in 30 years because that's a real scenario. Aside from the fact that I wouldn't have been in the workforce in the United States, but secondarily, we haven't the foggiest idea either whether Social Security is even going to be here when I get to
It's an
67
interesting
anyway.
bet, right? So you have to
Right.
make the calculus of, do I stay in the US workforce and maybe not actually get a return? Or do I start a business in Panama
Right.
And now, did that business enable you? I don't know this, so if I'm probing, let me know. Did that business allow you to have any flexibility on the visa that you were able to get?
So yes. So here's kind of I'll backtrack a little bit from when I first started here. Oh, the sun is coming out today. Um, Backtrack a little bit when I first got here. So when I first got here, I actually came in on a project for the company that I had worked for previously. So I worked for NTT Data for a number of years, and they have an office here in Panama City. And I came in on a project as a contractor with one of the other managers that I used to work on. So I was allowed to get a temporary visa for work purposes. That project then ended. It was a suspended project. And so I was allowed to keep my work visa for the 2 years. However, I needed to have a plan for when the 2 years ended because I no longer would be allowed to stay here. And so I didn't want to be someone who had to kind of come in and out at every 6 months and travel back and forth, which a lot of people do. I don't recommend that because clearly that is something that may or may not remain stable for the next few years. We have no idea. And of course, that's at the discretion of who you happen to catch when you come into immigration. So if they're in a good mood that day, sure. But if they're not, who knows?
Exactly. I don't recommend that, and I think the
No,
government also discourages that.
no. Discourages it, highly discourages it. So I wasn't quite in a space where I wanted to make the investment. And so you all know the Friendly Nations visa has that $300,000 investment that you need to make with for property or put in a bank account. I wasn't in a financial space to be able to stick that money in a bank account and then not touch it.
Right.
Right. I needed it to live. And I also wasn't quite committed enough that I wanted to be a property owner again either. I just wasn't there. And so I kind of needed to find a space. And so I, talked to a number of people here and there around and did find out from a colleague or a friend of mine that this was an option to be able to open a business. And so when I first started thinking about it, I was like, well, I don't know what I would do. I, you know, I opening an IT business here would have been fine, but again, the restrictions and some of the things that I needed to do would have had to been a lot more complicated. And I just really kind of didn't want to be in that space anymore.
And you know what?
So
That's the answer right there.
right,
I've been in tech for 20 years, and I enjoy the money, but let's be honest,
I,
it's
I'm
not
tired.
necessarily the most creative thing that I've ever done in my life.
No. And so when the opportunity to open my business, and especially allowing me that I could work from home, and so a lot of people don't realize that here the food business in Panama is a bit of a different industry, right? So there are certain things that require restaurant space, there are certain things that don't. Since my company was packaged cookie dough, and I didn't actually have to bake anything, I was allowed to have a space where I could make them at home. I still got an inspection, periodically when they needed to do that, but I'm allowed to do it from home. I will say I don't suggest it. It is a lot of work, and luckily for me, because my mom lives here, I can invade her space and use up her kitchen. But it's been helpful to be able to kind of use that as my tool to stay here. Now I'm not quite sure necessarily in the space or in the way that I'm going if it's sustainable entirely right now. But when I first started, I wasn't allowed to sell to anybody except for expats because I didn't have a work visa and a corporation established yet. So now that that process is coming to an end and finishing itself, I'm I'm in a space where now I can branch out and kind of do a little bit more with it. So
So in a lot of ways, if I kind of summarize this, it's oftentimes easier to go on business for yourself here than it is to find employment. And once you go through the right channels to get yourself established as a corporation recognized in Panama, it can open up some doors for you. And I know there's
right.
plenty of establishments in Panama City that cater specifically towards expats. So, but your stuff, I know it'll go beyond that community. I already know, and
I hope
my
so. I
my
do.
little chunk of a dozen chocolate chip with nuts. I'm going to put my plug in now.
Well, the one thing too, I think, and so something I do like to tell people, and again, I don't know how long these visas they change every year. A
Uh,
couple of years before I don't even know if it was a couple of years. It might have been a year before I got here. The Friendly Nations visa was a vastly different approach, right? It was $5,000 to do that as opposed to 300,000 in a year's
Well,
time span.
the friendly
Vastly changed.
nation still isn't 300. It's less. The 300
Yep.
I've got is a golden visa. So we use equity to purchase a place here because a little bit older, we decided that this is going to be home for us, and so
Right.
we made the commitment. And for those who are watching the show, if you're willing to do that, and a lot of people say just rent, and that's definitely an option. I don't think that it has to be a religious discussion, if you will. But if you choose to purchase, you can get your cedula, your ID, that's recognized through all the government, and you're a permanent resident for the next at least 10 years, unless you and talk to your lawyer about this, unless you relinquish your property and take the money back within two, I believe. So
Right.
there's all, but the thing is there's a bunch of different visas, and they change annually. Even the number
Annual.
was 300,000. Then they said they were going to raise it to 500,000, and then they decided
Yeah.
to, and it was like
Well, I do think still right now, so the Friendly Nations visa is still at $200,000 for
okay,
an investment. So it was at $5,000, which is a vast jump.
that's a big jump.
It's a huge jump. And so it made, but a lot of that was also during COVID when there was a time that there needed to be some kind of influx of money, right? And so once COVID had ended, and I think, and again, I'm not part of the government by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that once the government realized the influx of foreigners who were coming, it's a even governments are businesses, so
Oh,
you
absolutely.
know,
They're looking for revenue, and
yeah,
the types of people. If I talk about just like the last 6 months and talking to real estate professionals and tour operators, um, there's a lot of there's a lot of African Americans coming, a lot of Black people coming. There's a lot of Russian oligarchs coming. There are
yes, I hear,
there are a lot of Middle East coming. Um, and the cool thing that I like is that for the most part, those communities don't tend to stay unto themselves. They do tend to come
right.
and just kind of widen out. The mitigating factor being, can you speak the language? So if you can speak Spanish, it's all love for you. And if you're willing to learn,
Yep.
it's all love for you.
Absolutely. I think too, one of the things is that we were talking about the difference between, people say, well, why not Costa Rica as opposed to Panama? And I think a lot of it depends on what your choice of lifestyle was. Again, I wasn't someone who wanted a beach lifestyle. I wasn't there yet. I'm not of retirement age. And so for me, it wasn't a lifestyle I wanted to live. And so for me, I needed to be in a city. And I think a lot of people, say like, oh, well, I hear so much things. I hear that, Panama's so much cheaper than, and it's one of those weird myths that I like to kind of dispel from people so they don't get the wrong idea about what they're getting themselves into. Panama, yes, is cheaper in some aspects than living in the United States, depending on where you're coming from.
Yes.
But it also depends on what kind of lifestyle you choose to have when you move to Panama. And I think a lot of people aren't
Well,
quite understanding
say that
that.
last part out loud one more time. People think it's cheap.
Choose your lifestyle wisely. Um, a lot of it has to do with, I think that we get this grandiose idea of what living abroad seems to be. And so I think we see these things on TV where somehow you imagine that I can go live in this mansion for no money in a foreign country. And that's not quite how that works, right? And
Nothing
so
is free. There is
nothing.
absolutely nothing that is free.
Nothing. Nothing. And I think also too, something about Panama, because Panama is a little less discovered than a lot of Latin American countries. And I think a lot of people were kind of confused when I chose Panama, and we're not really sure that they understood the choice. And to them, I was moving to a third world country, and they can't imagine what in the world I would choose that for. And so sometimes I have to remember, like, hi, I live in a city, a
Very
metropolitan
large
city,
city. Yes.
with a subway and an airport and skyscrapers. And I think when people come here for the first time and they land in Panama City, they're a bit stunned, I think, almost on what they're showing up to.
Oh, no
I
doubt.
don't think
No doubt about it.
um, and so again, choosing lifestyle is wise. I mean, I got really lucky on the apartment I found. I didn't want to be a homeowner again, or and that just wasn't something I was ready to do. So renting for me was fine. I knew I was not coming back, and I knew my mom was not coming back, so I did save a bit of money. My furniture in my house wasn't quite that old; it was only 3 years old, so we took everything with us.
Okay.
And so I was able to find a apartment for less money with because it's unfurnished. And so, there was a lot of other factors too. I have a cat who is 17 years old. And so for her, the move
Senior.
was a bit more uncomfortable because
I think your cat qualifies for pensionata.
right, I honestly I'm gonna ask them. um but I wanted her to be comfortable too because she would be used to furniture that she could recognize and smell. And so that, there was a lot of factors in that. And again, I would I'm not as someone who had lived abroad already and had lived in furnished apartments, I wasn't a massive fan of living in other people's furniture just because it wasn't my own. It's not comfortable, right? And if I ever decide I'm going to move to another apartment, I then have to adjust to new furniture again and adjust, so you can't really ever make something home to you because it isn't your stuff. And so
Yeah,
I just, you know,
I agree with you on that. That was
right.
one of the reasons I was not a fan of renting. For us, we knew we didn't bring any of our furniture down, but we did bring a lot of exercise equipment because of who I'm married to. And I know that you don't want to move that stuff too often, too frequently, because that can break things. And the whole idea of having to move that from spot to spot to spot as a renter, or being in a furnished place, and specifically furnished place, where you don't know who's been on that sofa, who's been sleeping in that bed, what they did it. No, 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 no. I was not down for
No,
that
right.
story at all.
No. And again, just the comfortableness, right? Right. Even in a furnished apartment, you can buy little trinkets here and there, but it just doesn't ever, to me, and I'm, no discouragement to anybody who that is something that works for them. And I think that there are a lot of people that works for them. And I'm really fine with that. It just was something I didn't want to do.
Let's pause for this
And I felt
moment.
okay.
All right. So we were talking about just how expensive it can be in Panama versus what people think and expect it to be. Um, so when you think about your opportunities here versus staying at home in New York, what keeps you here? What's the is it a financial draw? Is it a freedom draw? What do you think it is?
So for me, it's a few things. And I'd sent you a picture earlier, or made a post earlier, so we could touch on that too. That's one of the reasons. But the weather, I hate snow. I do not like cold weather. I no, thank you. I'm not a fan, and so that is helpful. I will say it is extremely hot in Panama, but it's better to me than being in snow, and so I will take that any day of the week. Um, Also, too, for me, having been to a lot of places in the world, I realized how much different life was other places than in the United States. And I think a lot of times Americans, we're given this kind of uh, cloud 9 vision of what it's like to be an American, right? And so I hear Americans who don't travel all the time say, well, it just seems odd that you'd be running to move to another country when lots of people are trying to sneak into America. Sure, they are. But again, it's also a vision that they've been given by media that's much different than what a lot of us are experiencing. I was thankful and fortunate to grow up in kind of a generation where I was able to do things that I wanted to, and I didn't really have any restrictions in terms of my gender or my race or those things. And growing up in a state like that as well helped. One thing I will say, and of course you're from the opposite coast in another relatively liberal state as well. But I think for me, kind of moving to the South at the time that the administration had changed over to Donald Trump was a bit hard for me. And it was something that I couldn't understand because I came from a place that didn't happen. I wasn't used to that. That wasn't something that I understood. And it was really kind of the first time that I had experienced in my lifetime realizing that there are some people in America who just really are terrible people. I mean, there are terrible people everywhere, but there were just so many things happening during that time that it was just not somewhere I wanted to I wanted to stay anymore. It was uncomfortable. And having been traveled and having been to other countries, I realized I could have a much better life, probably a longer life, a happier one in some place that I wasn't miserable. I mean, we got to a point during COVID where you didn't even want to turn the television on anymore. Things were just uncomfortable. And it just, you thought to yourself, well, maybe this is just a phase, right? We're in this moment that we're all stuck inside and we don't really know what to do. And there wasn't really a big kind of push or vision for people in the United States about what United States really is deep down at its roots until COVID, because there was nothing else to do. We couldn't watch anything else. We were captive, right? And so I think a lot of it started with the George Floyd incident, being able to see that and realizing we haven't grown from what this country started. On the surface, we've painted this picture, but it's like one of those things. You can go into someone's kitchen all you want and put down a tablecloth on top of the table, but if you lift the tablecloth up and you haven't washed the table's still dirty. Doesn't matter how much you cover it up. Do whatever you want.
Well said. Well said. So what we got to do is buy a bunch of cookies so you can stay here. So
Right.
let's talk about that for a moment. And one of the
Yeah.
things before we wrap this up, one of the things I want to talk about real quickly is just how commerce is different. The mechanics are different here. For example, a lot of places that I look for they don't have websites. Like everything is WhatsApp. So you've got the
WhatsApp.
whole menu on WhatsApp. So
Yeah.
give the folks a taste of what kind of cookies and what kind of treats you've got that they can order on WhatsApp if they happen to be in the city. And don't be here on a visit, because if you don't have an oven, you can't enjoy them.
Right. Well, I will say, so not entirely. I don't do it often. And again, if there's a larger order and there's something going on, a special scenario, you have guests coming, I do bend a bit for my friends and I will bake things, even though I don't love to, because it's a pain in the butt. But I will if need be. And or the same scenario, people are moving, things are getting adjusted. You might not have the things I get it. We're all there. So
if you're
I did
staying
bring
at
a
the
couple of
JW
things.
Marriott, we might be able to get you a box, is what you're saying.
Fair enough. Yes. I will charge a couple extra dollars though. Electricity here in Panama City isn't cheap.
So you got chocolate chip with nuts. You've got
chocolate chip with nuts.
red velvet.
Red velvet. So yeah, I packaged them like this. So I brought a little package people could show. So they are frozen in individual cookie doughs for themselves. So individual cookies. And they're packaged in 3. So this is the red velvet. Red velvet has homemade cream cheese, white chocolate chips in it that I spend a long time making myself. So
hey, folks, listen. So I got the variety pack my first time.
Yeah.
I got there's a Bailey's cookie, I think it was Bailey's.
Yep.
Just get yourself a box. It's a treat. Just get yourself a box.
Yep.
And then you'll thank me later, and then we can keep Kamri in Panama.
Right, yes, of course. I have to stay in Panama. I will say the most sold flavor that I have, oddly enough, is the one flavor that I don't actually even like. And not because I don't like the cookie personally. I just am not a fan of nuts. I have never been. I don't like them.
Okay.
And it's funny because of all the cookies that I have made, is the only cookie that I have actually made and had to have tested by someone else, because I literally just don't want to eat. But butter pecan. This cookie is the most sold cookie that I have. I do not like pecans at all. And so, a little tidbit of side information. I have actually never tasted the cookie myself. I have no idea what that cookie tastes like. My mom is the sole, pusher of this cookie. So
first of all, that's hilarious. But second of all, I trust mom. I've met mom. I trust her. I think it's good.
Yeah. Yes. And so she, as I was developing them, I had already had a recipe that was made, and something that made it a little easier, I think, when you're organized, especially here with business, things don't always work out the way you want. So I will say one thing that I struggle with a bit is that there are some things that I can't find all the time, right? I am used to finding brown sugar everywhere. Brown sugar is not a huge staple, and I do not mean sugar that's brown. I mean actual Domino brown sugar. is not a massive staple in every store. It doesn't exist in every store, and you sometimes have to hope that you can catch it. And so that was something I had to learn to adjust when I started making cookies here. I had to adjust the recipe, and I played with it for a long time. There were some months that it took me to kind of make that little adjustment because there are just some things that don't exist here. I was using white chocolate chips, and in the United States, they sell Hershey's sells a version that is cream cheese flavored.
Mm-hmm.
They don't exist in Panama,
Oh no.
and so they don't sell them. And so I
You gotta make your own.
had to make my own. Right.
Overcome the odds. There you go.
Yeah. Yep. So there are a lot of things. Like I said, owning the business has been wonderful. It is really good. I'm glad that at this point that the corporation paperwork is done, and now I can kind of branch out into actual Panamanian businesses. I'm looking into doing a ghost kitchen where I will be able to actually send them out warm instead. And so that's something that's on the venture. I have a couple of meetings next week about that. So we're looking forward to hoping that connects. I've had a few people who run tour groups who have asked to order them for their guests when they come, and so they put them in little gift bags. A good friend of ours, Matt, he does, and everyone gets to meet Matt later. But he also same thing. It's been really supportive and wonderful, and puts them out at his open houses. And so it's been really nice to find spaces that they fit. And I think one of the things about opening a business in Panama and something that will help you sustain is that you have to find something that really there may not be a niche for. If you walk in any grocery store in Panama, there is no cookie dough. You can walk in any grocery store in any city in the United States and find Toll House cookie dough in the refrigerator section. That's not a thing here. Doesn't exist. And so I'm hoping that I can kind of corner the market on that and become a space where I can do that. And it's nice to have them frozen because you don't have to open everything at one time. You can bake 3, you can bake 12, you can do whatever kind of you want. So I'm looking forward to branching out, seeing how this goes, seeing the distance, and starting some social media campaigning on it. And I've been trying to just get the corporation itself put together, but it's been a lot of fun. And I've gained 22 pounds eating cookies, so that's also.
Let me take some of that weight off of you. Everybody, thank you, Kamri, for joining us for our first
Thank you.
episode.
Appreciate it.
We're going to get this out to the people. I know they want to hear your story. You're going to inspire some people to follow their dream here. They're going to understand Panama is cheaper, not necessarily cheap, but you can have a great life here and
Absolutely
all the things that you wanted to do. You can live out your best dreams. So on that note, we're going to call it a day. Thank you, and I'm going to be over there soon to get me a box.
Buenas tardes.